Hi, my name is Chris, and today I want to talk about Intervalometer, this one, and the EOS R. But first, a little bit of a rant why I think that you shouldn't even have to have something like this to do what I'm about to explain. I think that intervalometers are a thing of the past, at least for most use cases. We would be able to do this in software inside of the camera, but we are still not getting that. Even if you look at certain cameras that do have some kind of raw photo taking capabilities inside of them, I have used the Sony A7 line, and even there it is a after install application that is kind of buggy, really hard to use, and especially hard to switch into. I don't know about newer versions of the Sony system, and I also don't know about any other camera systems, but with Canon and the Sony A7 II as well as S2, those are the ones that I've been using, and it is really something that I don't understand why it is so hard. But why would you actually want to shoot intervalometer, raw photos, and why is the time-lapse mode inside of the camera not enough? Well, let's start right there. At least they have put a time-lapse video mode into the EOS R, and I'm really happy about that because it already helps a ton. Now, having that available in 4K and 1080p is something that makes it already quite useful for those moments where you want to just take a very simple video time-lapse of whatever scene you have in front of you. That may be enough for most use cases and most users, but I personally think that even that is lacking. For one, why can't we do that in C-Log? And the other one, why can't we set up that time-lapse shooting mode as a custom shooting mode and actually have to switch into it proactively? Those two things would be really cool if they just worked, but they don't. But even after that, there are many more things that I think that are lacking, and that most specifically is the functionality to actually shoot time-lapse raw photos, or JPEGs if you prefer. But why would you want to do that? And I think that there is actually a very valid point for wanting to have the ability to shoot raw time lapses. And that is that when you do that, and this is actually something that came up around 2008, 2007, 2006 already. And that was that by shooting time lapses, you were actually able to get a lot of more quality in terms of video than you were able to do otherwise. And that is actually something that also brought up certain productions that wouldn't have been happening if it weren't for that. My personal experience with that was that around the time of 2005 to 2008, there was actually an upspring in time-lapse photography work, because at the time there were cameras that actually could shoot 8 to 12 megapixel photos for relatively cheap, and then you could actually do a 4K time-lapse with that material. And of course you couldn't really shoot that with those cameras in video mode, but you could in raw photo mode. So shooting raw photos, you could actually get that much more detail, that much more quality and resolution inside of the little camera that is something that can shoot 8 to 12 megapixels. This also brought up a movie called Timescapes by Tom Lowe, which at the time was some craft that I really appreciated. It's a beautiful work of art in terms of nature photography as well as slow motion work, and it all started because this guy was able to afford a small, very cheap camera that could shoot those 8 megapixels, and he was actually doing motorized and moving time lapses of different things that were pretty incredible for the time, and all of that was possible because of time-lapse shooting modes and those things. But I digress. If you have the time, watch the Timescapes movie. You can find it on YouTube, and I will have a link to the website of the movie in the description below as well. It's incredible, it's beautiful, it's just mesmerizing nature in slow motion and time-lapse over night and day and all those things, and all that with amazing music as well. But there are actually a couple of more reasons why I like inbuilt intervalometers or time-lapse shooting modes for raw photos, and that is self-portraiture as well as group shots where you want to be in them yourself. Of course, there are all kinds of ways without having a time-lapse shooting mode or intervalometer or something like that. For one, you can use the timer and run back and forth between the camera and wherever you want to be in the shot. And now, of course, you have apps on your phone with which you can actually control the cameras via Wi-Fi. But those are mostly janky and never really work for me, so I am falling back onto the solution of actually having a remote trigger with time-lapse or intervalometer functionality. Now, I've been using this remote and intervalometer for the past year almost, since I've owned this camera, and it has been really useful for different circumstances. I'll link those kind of things in the description below, and you have to kind of look for the right one for you because they might be named differently in different countries. But this one actually is called AX5 and may only be available in Germany. The great thing about the setup though is actually you have a cable that is detachable from both ends, and then you can actually plug this into the remote here, which is the one that actually controls all those things, and you plug this one into the camera. And the other mode that you can use this with is that you plug this into the receiver, you put this one into the camera, into the hot shoe mount, and while having set that up, then this one is a remote that you can take with you wherever you want to shoot with. And you still have the ability to use the intervalometer built into this little device here. When you turn it on, you actually have multiple ways of setting this up, and you might want to go into the manual for your own device, because this can be quite tricky depending on what the button layout is and everything. But for the most part, you can choose between how many frames to shoot, when to start shooting, and if there should be a delay of shooting, how long the camera should be shooting, and how long the time should be between every single shot. So this is really useful, I think, for self-portraiture or group shots, to make just a photo every second or every 2 seconds, so that you can later on choose which one you want to be choosing. Because oftentimes, specifically with this camera, which after a 10-second counter just takes 1 photo, then this becomes really useful, because with this setup, you actually can just take multiple photos, take your time in front of the camera, go back to your camera and actually look at many of them, instead of just having to use the timer and you have 1 photo to look at. And that can be quite annoying to go back and forth, especially if you want to take a photo in a landscape where you are much farther away from the camera. Additionally, you can also use this in video mode when you set it up in a way that the shutter button actually also starts a recording, and then you can actually use the remote to start recording and stop recording. And that is something that is quite useful when you're a little further away and you don't want to just reach over, and it makes this whole thing a little bit of a mess and then shakes everything and potentially crashes your camera to the ground or whatever. But it's quite useful to be able to remotely start and stop recording. So you may have noticed that I quite like intervalometers that are built into cameras and are actually able to shoot raw photos. However, most cameras don't actually do that, even though the Sony lineup has that time-lapse app, which is kind of janky, I think. But I'm just crossing my fingers that in the future, the Canon lineup may actually get those kind of features built into it, not just in a time-lapse video mode, but actually a intervalometer photo taking mode. Now, of course, there will probably still be good reason to have that remote trigger for your camera. And there are all kinds of high-end time-lapse triggering modes and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I actually have gone with one of those things that is not app controlled. There's nothing around smartness or having some kind of extra features like Holy Grail time lapses and those kind of things. That's something that I wasn't really focused on when getting this setup. And that is actually something that makes it usable, very simple, very logical. And that's something that I also like about the Canon cameras, that they are cameras and not necessarily computers. That may be good and bad at the same time, but at the same time, it makes them very usable. Now that's all that I have for you today, and I hope it was helpful or in some kind of way entertaining. If you have any questions, please leave those in the comment section down below, and I will make sure to answer as many of them as possible. There are a couple more videos about the EOS R on this channel, and there are probably more coming as well. So if you want, subscribe to the channel, check out the other videos, like it if you liked it, and of course, see you next time. Ciao, ciao!